I was sitting in my lawyer's office when he told me the news that would change everything. But let me back up 5 years to explain how I ended up here with a $1 million lawsuit in my favor and 3 HOA board members facing criminal charges. My name is Marcus Webb, and I inherited a peculiar piece of property in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. My grandfather had been a shrewd businessman who purchased 20 acres of industrial-zoned land back in the 1970s, when Henderson was still finding its identity. The land sat empty for decades, just generating property taxes and the occasional inquiry from developers. When he passed in 2019, I became the sole owner of this dusty patch of desert that the county records clearly marked as industrial zoning. I had no immediate plans for the property. I was working as an architect in downtown Las Vegas, pulling decent money and frankly too busy to think about development projects. The land just sat there, a weird inheritance that I figured I would deal with eventually. Maybe sell it, maybe develop it myself when I had more capital. The property taxes were manageable, and I was in no rush. That all changed in March 2021 when I got a call from a surveyor named David Chen. He sounded nervous on the phone, asking if I owned the industrial parcel at the corner of Industrial Road and Sunset Avenue. I confirmed that I did, and he went quiet for a moment before asking if I could meet him at the property. Something in his voice made me clear my afternoon schedule. When I arrived at the property that Thursday afternoon, I found David standing next to his equipment, staring at a construction site that had appeared on my land. And I do mean a construction site. There were concrete foundations being poured, steel beams being erected, and at least 24 workers bustling around with the kind of purpose that suggested this was not a new project. Mr. Webb, David said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the mild spring weather. I was hired by Pinnacle Manufacturing to verify the property boundaries for their new facility. But when I ran the survey, something did not add up. The RECORDS, short and sir, everyone factory on your land. I stood there, watching a crane lift a massive steel beam into place and felt my brain struggle to process what I was hearing. My land, are you certain? Sprup me the survey priata yeta overlaid with the values, AUI. Property records. The factory footprint was entirely within my property boundaries. Not partially, not accidentally encroaching by a few feet. The entire thing was on my land. How long has this been going on? I asked. Based on the construction progress, I would estimate they started about 4 months ago. This is not a small operation. Whatever they are building here, it is a full-scale manufacturing facility. I kept my tone startedrekisgectful, but picture s and videos of everything. The construction equipment, the workers, the partially completed building, the signs that read Pinnacle Manufacturing Grand Opening August 2021. Then I called my lawyer. Richard Soto had handled my grandfather's estate and had kept me as a client for general legal matters. When I explained the situation, I heard him actually laugh in disbelief. Marcus, absolutely certain this is your LIND a PROPERTY. Right here with the we can't JUET cause si it repel do ria what's whatever they wad pullad bick up on of his some tablet. This is definitely my land. Do not, and I mean absolutely do not, say anything to anyone on that construction site. Take your pictures, document everything, and get to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We need to figure out exactly what is happening here before we make any moves. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the construction site, about the massive investment someone was making on my property without my knowledge or permission. How did this even happen? Who authorized this? The next morning, I was in Richard's office at 8 sharp. Richard had already started pulling records. Okay, so here is what I found. The construction permits were issued to Pinnacle Manufacturing, but the property owner listed on the permits is the Sunset Hills Home Owners Association. Marcus, do you have any connection to this HOA? I have never even heard of it. My property is industrial land. There is no house, no residence, nothing that would make it part of an HOA. Richard nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard. That is what I thought. So I did some digging into this Sunset Hills HOA. It was established in 2018 and covers a residential development about half a mile from your property. The president is a woman named Patricia Hendricks, and from what I can see, she has been quite busy. He turned his monitor toward me, showing me the HOA's website. Sunset Hills was a planned community of upscale homes, the kind of development that had exploded around Henderson in the late 2010s. The website featured smiling families, pristine lawns, and testimonials about community values. Here is where it gets interesting, Richard continued. I pulled the construction permit application. Patricia Hendricks signed as the property owner and submitted a deed showing the HOA's ownership of your land. But Marcus, everyone, shows you as the USOLE. Owner, there is no record of any sale or transfer. So she forged documents to get the permits. That is what it looks like, but it gets weirder. I found the contract between the HOA and Pinnacle Manufacturing. The HOA is leasing your land to Pinnacle for 25 years at $75,000. Per month. I did the math in my head, $900,000 per year for 25 years. Then, Richard, what are my options here? He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Well, the obvious move is to march down there right now, show them your deed, and shut the whole thing down. You could probably get an emergency injunction, tomorrow halt construction, and writing I. Everyone involved, but Marcus, I want you to consider something else. I am listening. Right now, they do not know that you know. They do not know their entire operation is built on fraud. If we shut them down now, yes, you will win in court, but they will probably declare bankruptcy, and you will spend years trying to collect damages from entities with no assets. But if we let this play out, if we let them finish construction and start production, if we let them invest millions of dollars into a facility on your land, then we have much more leverage. You want me to let them build a factory on my property? I want you to let them hang themselves. Every month they operate, every payment they receive from Pinnacle, every dollar they invest in infrastructure, it all builds your case. And more importantly, it builds your damages. Right now, they have committed fraud to obtain permits. If we wait, they will have operated a major commercial fraud for years. The criminal liability alone will be substantial. I sat there, thinking about what Richard was proposing. It felt risky, but it also felt right. What about the statute of limitations? For fraud, 6 years in Nevada. And for every month they receive those lease payments, that is a new act of fraud. The clock resets continuously. You have time, Marcus, use it wisely. What do I need to do? Document everything. Every interaction, every piece of mail, every public record. I will. Monitor the permits and the lease payments. We will build an airtight case. And in a few years, when they are deeply invested and dependent on this facility, we will drop the hammer. I left Richard's office with a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the audacity of the fraud. Curiosity about how they thought they would get away with it. And a cold satisfaction at the idea of watching them dig their own grave. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as the factory took shape. I would drive by every few weeks, always careful not to draw attention to myself. By August 2021, the facility was complete. Structure, maybe 40,000 square feet of modern manufacturing space. With loading docks, offices, and what looked like sophisticated equipment visible through the windows. The grand opening was quite an event. I did not attend, of course, but I saw the photos on the Sunset Hills HOA website. Patricia Hendricks was there, cutting a ribbon alongside the CEO of Pinnacle Manufacturing and several local politicians. The mayor of Henderson gave a speech about economic development and job creation. Patricia gave interviews to the local news, talking about how the HOA had worked tirelessly to bring quality jobs to the community. I saved every article, every photo, every press release. Richard was building a file that was growing thicker by the month. In October 2021, I got my first direct contact from the HOA. A letter arrived at my home address, forwarded from my grandfather's old address that was still on the county property tax records for the industrial land. The letter was from Patricia Hendricks herself on official Sunset Hills HOA letterhead. Dear property owner, it read. For ASSUMEDMANAGEMSENT. Responsibilities for certain parcels in the Industrial Road Corridor as part of our Community Improvement Initiative. Your property at the corner of Industrial Road and Sunset Avenue falls within our expanded jurisdiction. As such, you are now subject to HOA dues and regulations. Please remit payment of $500 for the current quarter by November 1, 2021. Failure to pay will result in liens and potential legal action. Regards, Patricia Hendricks, HOA President. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Not only had they built a factory on my land, but now they were trying to charge me HOA dues for the privilege. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Richard, who responded within an hour. Perfect. Save the original, do not respond, let them send more. They did send more. Every quarter, like clockwork, I received a bill for HOA dues. By the third notice, they added late fees. By the fourth, they were threatening to place a lien on my property for non-payment. I saved every single letter. Meanwhile, I was monitoring the factory's operations. Pinnacle Manufacturing, I learned, was producing high-end automotive components. They had contracts with Tesla's Gigafactory and several other major manufacturers. The facility ran 2 shifts, employed over 100 people, and was, by all accounts, a significant success. I created a spreadsheet tracking everything. Lease payments from Pinnacle to the HOA, which I was able to confirm through public business filings. Property improvements, which I documented through periodic site visits. Employee counts, which I tracked through job postings and news articles. Every data point was another nail in the HOA's coffin. In 2022, things escalated. I received a certified letter from an attorney named Barbara Simmons, representing the Sunset Hills HOA. Payment of the HOA OFFICE dues. A CCUMULATED to over LOOKED at the THRE 1000 THICKDOLLARS of SINCLUD, in PERS INGWIDEEYES fees and administrative costs. The HOA was initiating foreclosure proceedings on my property. She immediately, to FORECLO its SE on my lend to, cover fake HOA dues for a property that is not even in their jurisdiction. Marcus, this is gold, Richard said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. They are not just committing fraud anymore. They are attempting to steal your property through fraudulent foreclosure. That is a whole new level of criminal liability. Do not respond. Let them proceed. We will shut it down in court when the time is right, but every step they take now just adds to their exposure. The foreclosure notice was published in the Henderson Home News as required by Nevada law. I bought several copies of the paper, preserving them in plastic sleeves. The notice listed my property by its legal description, and stated that it would be auctioned to satisfy the debt to the Sunset Hills HOA. About a week before the scheduled auction in April 2022, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I answered, curious. "Is this Marcus Webb?" a woman's voice asked. It was sharp, authoritative, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Speaking. "This is Patricia Hendricks, president of the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association. I am calling regarding your delinquent property at Industrial Road and Sunset Avenue." "My property is not delinquent," I said calmly. "Mr. Webb, you have failed to pay mandatory HOA dues for over a year. Your property is subject to our jurisdiction, and you have ignored multiple notices and legal proceedings. We are offering you one final opportunity to settle this debt before your property is auctioned. The total amount, including all fees and legal costs, is now $8,500. Miss Hendricks, can I ask you a question? When did my property become part of your HOA's jurisdiction?" There was a pause. "The Sunset Hills HOA has authority over all properties within our designated boundaries, as established in our founding documents in 2018. And you have documentation showing that my property is within those boundaries." "Of course we do. Now, are you going to settle this debt or not?" "I think I will pass." "But thank you for the call, Miss Hendricks. This conversation has been very informative." "Then you leave us no choice. Your property will be auctioned as scheduled." She hung up. I immediately called Richard and recounted the conversation. He advised me to file a challenge to the foreclosure, but to do so in a way that would not reveal the full extent of my knowledge. He drafted a simple objection stating that I disputed the HOA's jurisdiction over my property, and requested that the auction be postponed pending a hearing. The hearing was scheduled for May 2022 in Henderson Justice Court. I showed up in a suit with Richard beside me. Patricia Hendricks was there with her attorney Barbara Simmons, looking confident and annoyed in equal measure. The judge, a tired-looking man named Judge Raymond Foster, reviewed the filings. "Mr. Webb, you are objecting to the foreclosure on the grounds that your property is not within the HOA's jurisdiction." "That is correct, Your Honor." Judge Foster turned to Barbara Simmons. "Counselor, can you provide documentation establishing jurisdiction?" Barbara pulled out a folder and approached the bench. "Your Honor, the Sunset Hills HOA's jurisdiction is clearly established in our founding documents, which were properly filed with the county. Mr. Webb's property falls within the boundaries described in those documents." I watched the judge review the papers, and I saw the moment his eyebrows went up. He looked at Patricia Hendricks, then at me, then back at the documents. "Miss Simmons, these documents describe a residential development. The property in question is zoned industrial. How does your HOA claim jurisdiction over industrial property?" Barbara hesitated, clearly not expecting this question. "Your Honor, the HOA's boundaries were expanded in 2020 to include adjacent properties for community management purposes. Do you have documentation of this expansion approved by the property owners?" "The HOA board voted to expand the boundaries, Your Honor." Judge Foster removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Miss Simmons, I am going to say this as clearly as I can. An HOA cannot simply vote to expand its jurisdiction over property that its members do not own. That is not how property law works. Do you have any documentation showing that Mr. agreed to be Patricia see part of this HOA?" Barbara shuffled through her papers, and I could see the panic starting to set in. "Your Honor, we believe the property was part of the community development." "Believed or verified?" Silence. Judge Foster turned to me. "Mr. Webb, do you have your deed?" Richard stood. "Your Honor, we have the deed, but we would like to request that this matter be moved to district court." Given the complexity of the issues involved, we believe it requires more extensive proceedings. The judge nodded slowly. I am inclined to agree. The foreclosure is hereby stayed pending further proceedings. Miss Simmons, out without IOEYING a SUGGE eject, STU and your client verify your facts before this goes any further. This case is transferred to the Clark County District Court. Next case. As we left the courtroom, I saw Patricia Hendricks in a heated conversation with Barbara Simmons in the hallway. Patricia's face was red, and she kept gesturing aggressively. I made sure to walk past them on my way out. Mr. Webb, Patricia Tom Rodriguez became the called Alu Oot. This is not over. You owe legitimate debts to our community. I stopped and turned to face her. Miss Hendricks, I look forward to resolving this matter in district court. Have a great day. Her expression was priceless, a mix of rage and frustration. Richard pulled me away before I could enjoy it too much. Marcus, that went well, but now they are going to start digging. They are going to realize the problem they have created. We need to be ready for their next move. Over the next few months, things went quiet. The foreclosure was stayed and the HOA did not send any more dues notices. But I knew they were not done. I continued monitoring the factory, which was running at full capacity. Pinnacle had even announced an expansion plan in late 2022, adding a second production line that would increase their employee count by another 50 workers. Every month, the HOA was collecting $75,000 in lease payments from Pinnacle. Every month, they were profiting from their fraud, and every month, my case was getting stronger. In January 2023, as Richard Marcus, interesting had to priz happened, I received a settlement offer from the HOA. A settlement offer for what? They are willing to drop all claims for HOA dues and dismiss the foreclosure action if you agree to release them from any liability related to the property. I thought about that for a moment. So they want me to give up my right to sue them. Exactly. Which means they have figured out that they have a problem. They may not know the full extent yet, but they know enough to be worried. What should I do? Reject it. If they are offering to settle now, it means they are scared. Let them be scared. We are not even halfway through our timeline yet. Sarah rejected had the settlement offer, and things got interesting. In March 2023, I received a lawsuit from the Sunset Hills HOA. They were suing me for slander, claiming that I had made false statements about their jurisdiction over my property, and that these statements had damaged their reputation in the community. Richard laughed when he read the complaint. Marcus, this is desperate. They are trying to intimidate you into backing down, but this is actually great for us. Now we get to conduct discovery. We get to depose Patricia Hendricks. We get to subpoena their financial records. They just opened a door they cannot close. The legal battle began in earnest. Richard filed a counterclaim on my behalf, alleging fraud, forgery, theft, and about a dozen other causes of action. We demanded production of all documents related to the HOA's claim of ownership over my property, all financial records related to the Pinnacle lease, and all communications between HOA board members regarding my property. The discovery process took months, but it was worth the wait. In September 2023, we received boxes of documents from the HOA's attorney. Richard and I spent days going through them, and what we found was stunning. Patricia Hendricks had not acted alone. The entire HOA board had been involved in the scheme from the beginning. There were emails dating back to 2020 discussing how to acquire my property. They had actually tried to purchase it first, but could not locate me to make an offer. And frankly, ownership and deal with any problems later. The scheme had been Patricia's idea, but the other board members, including Vice President Donald Marsh and Treasurer Sandra Chen, had enthusiastically supported it. There were emails discussing the potential revenue from leasing the property, how they would use the money to fund improvements to the residential community, and their belief that any legal challenge would be too expensive for an individual property owner to pursue. Information from the records forged my grandfather's signature and submitted it with the construction permit application. They had also created fake HOA founding documents that showed expanded boundaries including my property. The whole thing was a carefully planned fraud. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails from Patricia to the other board members in mid-2022, right after the Justice Court hearing. She acknowledged that they had a jurisdictional problem and that there was a risk of exposure, but insisted they should continue collecting the lease payments until they were forced to stop. She wrote, "Even if we eventually have to return some money, we will have had the use of those funds for years. The worst case is we break even." Richard looked up from the emails with a grin. Marcus, they knew. They knew the scheme was fraud and they decided to continue anyway. This is not just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal conspiracy. We need to bring this to the district attorney. In November 2023, Richard and I met with an assistant district attorney named James Reeves in the Clark County DA's office. We brought boxes of evidence, our entire timeline of the fraud, and a detailed presentation of the scheme. James listened carefully, asking occasional questions and taking notes. When we finished, he sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Gentlemen, this is one of the most brazen frauds I have seen in my 10 years in this office. An HOA forging documents to steal property, lease it for profit, and then attempt fraudulent foreclosure when the real owner objects. This is going to make headlines. What are our next steps?" Richard asked. "I need to take this to my supervisor, but I do not see any reason why we would not pursue criminal charges. We are looking at forgery, fraud, theft, conspiracy, probably more charges as we dig deeper. Mr. Webb, are you willing to cooperate fully with a criminal investigation?" "Absolutely," I said. "One question," James said. "Why did you wait so long to come forward? This has been going on for years." Richard and I exchanged a glance. "Mr. Reeves, my client wanted to ensure that the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. If we had shut this down immediately, they could have claimed it was a mistake or misunderstanding. By letting it continue, we have documented a sustained, deliberate fraud. There is no room for excuses now." James nodded. "I understand. And frankly, the damages are much more substantial this way, which helps us make the case that this was a serious crime. Okay, gentlemen, leave the evidence with me. We will be in touch." The criminal investigation took several months. During that time, the civil case continued moving forward. In February 2024, we had depositions scheduled for Patricia Hendricks and the other board members. Patricia's deposition was spectacular. She showed up with her attorney, still projecting confidence and indignation. Richard started with basic questions about the HOA's formation, its jurisdiction, and its authority. Patricia answered smoothly, sticking to her story that the HOA had legitimate authority over my property. Then Richard pulled out the deed. My grandfather's original deed, filed with the county in 1974, showing clear ownership of the property. He slid it across the table to Patricia. "Miss Hendricks, do you recognize this document?" She glanced at it. "It appears to be a property deed." "It is the deed to the property at Industrial Road and Sunset Avenue. It shows ownership by Marcus Webb's grandfather, subsequently inherited by Marcus Webb. It has been on file with the county continuously since 1974. Were you aware of this deed when you claimed HOA ownership of the property? I watched the color drain from Patricia's face. Her attorney, a different lawyer now since Barbara Simmons had wisely withdrawn from the case, leaned over to whisper to her. We hill our responsible for verifying property ownership. Patricia finally said, that was handled by the HOA's administrative staff. Miss Hendricks, you signed the construction permit application claiming to be the property owner. You signed the lease agreement with Pinnacle Manufacturing as the representative of the property owner. You signed multiple foreclosure notices. Are you saying you never verified that the HOA actually owned the property before doing all of that? I relied on information provided to me. Richard pulled out another document, one of the emails we had obtained in discovery. Miss Hendricks, this is an email you sent to Donald Marsh in March 2020. In it, you write, we need to move fast on the industrial road property before the actual owner surfaces. Tenant in JUST Place, UKNOW Chklajas. Can you explain what you meant by actual owner? Her attorney objected, but the damage was done. Patricia stammered through an explanation about how she was referring to unclear property records, but it was obvious she was lying. Richard spent the next 2 hours methodically walking her through every email, every document, every step of the fraud. By the end, Patricia was barely responding, just saying, I do not recall, to almost every question. The depositions of Donald Marsh and Sandra Chen were similarly damaging. And the lead, but their drift-owned over on the BREEZE emails showed they were active participants in the scheme. Sandra, as treasurer, had personally processed the monthly lease payments from Pinnacle, depositing them into the HOA's accounts. Donald had helped forge the documents that were submitted to the county. In May 2024, the district attorney's office filed criminal charges. Patricia Hendricks, Donald Marsh, and Sandra Chen were each charged with multiple counts of forgery, fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The news made the front page of the Henderson Home News and was picked up by Las Vegas television stations. Factory on someone there was else's ANEW and was Amalu good for. Media to resist. I gave a brief statement to reporters outside my lawyer's office. For years, the ATL Ntitensat, with his HILL and 2S HOA has been KID's Operatins A. Manufacturing facility on my property without permission, collecting nearly $1 million per year in lease payments, and trying to foreclose on my land when I objected to their fake jurisdiction. Today, the legal system is holding them accountable. The reaction in the Sunset Hills community was intense. Homeowners who had been paying their regular HOA dues were shocked to learn that their board had been engaged in criminal fraud. Meetings, recalls, and threats of lawsuits from residents who felt betrayed. Management had fe and never RELEASED, a wanted to DRIVE her out of the community deviant, claiming the actions of. The board members were not authorized and did not represent the values of the community. Meanwhile, Pinnacle Manufacturing was in a panic. They had invested millions of dollars into a facility on land they did not actually have a lease for. Their CEO called Richard's office repeatedly, asking to meet with me to discuss the situation. In June 2024, I finally agreed to meet with Pinnacle's representatives. We met in a conference room at Richard's office. Pinnacle sent their CEO, their head of operations, and 2 lawyers. Mr. Webb, the CEO neighbors started Preston, saying that Pinnacle had no knowledge of any fraud. We conducted what we believed to be appropriate due diligence before entering into the lease agreement. We verified that the HOA had obtained proper permits and had documentation of ownership. We are victims here too. I nodded. I understand that, Mr. Preston, and I have no interest in destroying your business. But you need to understand that you have been operating on my property without my permission for 3 years, and you have been paying rent to criminals instead of the actual property owner. We recognize that, and we are prepared to make this right. We would like to negotiate a direct lease with you for the property. At what terms? Tom exchanged glances with his lawyers. We are currently paying $75,000 per month to the HOA. We would be willing to continue at the same rate with you as the landlord. Richard shook his head. Gentlemen, let us be realistic. You built a 40,000 square foot manufacturing facility on Mr. Webb's land. You have invested, what, $8 million into this facility. You have contracts with major automotive manufacturers that depend on this location. You cannot just move. Mr. Webb has substantial leverage here. What are you proposing? One of the Pinnacle lawyers asked. Fair market value, I said. INDEPANDANT. Appraisal of the lease value. For this property in its current condition, with its current improvements, taking into account the industrial zoning and the established manufacturing operations. And I want back payment for the 3 years you have been operating on my land without my permission. Tom's face went pale. Mr. Webb, that could be millions of dollars. Yes, it could. And that is what you owe me. Your company made a mistake by not properly verifying ownership before building on my land. That mistake is going to be expensive. The negotiations took 2 months. Several back with a FAIRMARKETMONTH Eslzasado Ra of $125,000 per month, given the improvements to the property and the established operations. For back rent covering the period from when Pinnacle started operations in August 2021 through June 2024, that totaled over $4 million. And I FOUNDD, that I didn't PAYMENTNEED, pull for the ANOR than that back rent, and agreed to a 20-year lease at the market rate. It clause CLO to SESTINFLATION. The total deal was worth over $36 million over the life of the lease. Richard negotiated it brilliantly, and in August 2024 we signed the agreement. But the story was not over yet. The criminal case against Patricia, Donald, and Sandra was moving forward, and the civil case was still pending. In September 2024, I received a call from James Reeves at the DA's office. Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up. We have been negotiating with the defense attorneys, and we have reached a plea agreement with Donald Marsh and Sandra Chen. Conspiracy on common CHARGES in exchange for PROPERTY, testifying against Patricia Hendricks. Patricia is refusing to take a plea deal, so we are going to trial in November. The trial was a media circus. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious members of the Sunset Hills community, and even some Pinnacle employees who had been following the case. I sat in the front row with Richard as the prosecution laid out the entire scheme for the jury. James Reeves was methodical and thorough. He walked the jury through every step of the fraud, from the initial emails discussing how to acquire my property, to the forged documents, to the construction of the factory, to the collection of millions of dollars in lease payments, to the attempted foreclosure. He presented dozens of documents, played excerpts from the depositions, and called multiple witnesses. Donald Marsh testified for 2 days, describing in detail how Patricia had orchestrated the scheme and how he had helped forge documents and mislead county officials. Financial the recall ASPECTs. how the HOA had collected over $2.7 million in lease payments from Pinnacle and used the money for various community improvements and personal expenses. My personalproblem was expensesolvse news to me. Apparently, Patricia had been paying herself a generous salary as HOA president using the lease payments, despite the fact that HOA board members are typically volunteers. She had also used HOA funds to take trips to Hawaii and San Francisco, claiming they were for HOA conferences, but the prosecution showed they were actually personal vacations. Patricia's defense was weak. Her attorney argued that she had made an honest mistake in believing the HOA had authority over my property, and that she had acted in what she believed to be the best interests of the community. But the emails destroyed that defense. There was no way to read those messages and believe Patricia thought she was acting legally. I testified on the 4th day of the trial. James asked me to walk the jury through my discovery of the fraud and my decision to let it continue while building my case. Mr. Webb and some DOZENS of ZULP might WONDERY you did not other idiotly hemsiaunims would have SHUT down. The construction when you discovered it. Can you explain your reasoning? Your Honor, I consulted with my attorney, and we decided that the best course of action was to document the fraud thoroughly. If I had shut it down immediately, the defendants could have claimed it was a mistake or misunderstanding. By letting it continue, by preserving every document and every communication, I ensured that there would be no question about what happened. This was a deliberate, sustained fraud, and I wanted the evidence to prove that beyond any doubt. Patricia's attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest that I had somehow participated in the fraud by not stopping it, but it did not land. The jury seemed to understand that I had been protecting my rights in the most effective way possible. After 2 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. Hendricks was SENTENCED in DECEMBER citing 2020. 6 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $3 million, representing the lease payments collected from Pinnacle plus penalties and interest. Donald Marsh and Sandra Chen, who had taken plea deals, each received 2 years in prison and were ordered to pay their share of restitution. The civil case settled shortly after the criminal verdict. The HOA insurance company paid out a substantial settlement to cover my legal fees and damages. The Sunset Hills HOA itself was essentially bankrupt, having lost its insurance coverage and facing numerous lawsuits from residents who were angry about the scandal. In January 2025, I drove out to the property to watch the factory in operation. It was strange to think that 5 years earlier, this had been an empty piece of desert, and now it was a thriving manufacturing facility employing over 150 people. The Pinnacle expansion had been completed, and the facility was operating at full capacity. Tom Preston, the Pinnacle CEO, met me for a tour of the facility. Despite the rocky start to our relationship, we had developed a good working rapport over the past year. "Marcus, I want to show you something," Tom said, leading me to a plaque mounted near the main entrance. It read, "Pinnacle Manufacturing Henderson Facility, built 2021, Marcus Webb, property owner." "We wanted to make sure everyone knows who actually owns this land," Tom said with a smile. "I appreciate that, Tom, and I appreciate you working with me to make this right. You could have destroyed us, Marcus. You could have demanded we tear down the building and restore the land. Instead, you gave us a fair deal. That says a lot about your character." As I drove away from the factory that day, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 5 years of watching a fraud unfold, documenting every detail, building an airtight case, and finally seeing justice served. It had required patience, strategy, and a willingness to trust the legal process. But more than that, it had been about standing up for property rights and refusing to let criminals profit from their schemes. Patricia Hendricks had thought she could steal my land through bureaucratic manipulation and fake documents. She had counted on me being too uninformed or too intimidated to fight back. She had been wrong. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place in March 2025 when the restitution payments started coming in. Patricia's assets had been seized, including her house in the Sunset Hills community, and the proceeds were being used to pay back the money she had stolen. Donald and Sandra were making monthly payments as well, though their contributions were smaller. Between the restitution payments, the civil settlement, and the new lease with Pinnacle, I had recovered everything I was owed and then some. But the real victory was not the money. It was knowing that 3 criminals were behind bars, that justice had been served, and that my property rights had been vindicated. I thought about framing the final foreclosure notice that Patricia had sent me, the one threatening to auction my property if I did not pay $8,500 in fake HOA dues. It would make a good conversation piece in my office, a reminder of the audacity of the scheme and the satisfaction of watching it crumble. My phone rang. It was Richard. "Marcus, you are not going to believe this. I just got a call from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. They want to do a feature story on your case." Apparently, it is becoming a teaching example in property law classes around the country. I laughed. A teaching example of what? Of what happens when criminals think they can get away with fraud. Of the importance of documentation and patience. Of why you should always verify property ownership before building a factory. Take your pick. Tell them I am happy to talk. This story deserves to be told. And that is exactly what I am doing now, telling this story so that other property owners know their rights and understand that standing up to fraud, even when it seems overwhelming, is always worth it. Patricia Hendricks thought she could build an empire on stolen land. Instead, she built a prison cell for herself, one forged document at a time. The Henderson factory still operates today, producing components for electric vehicles and employing members of the local community. The Sunset Hills HOA has reformed under new leadership, implementing strict oversight procedures and transparency requirements to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. And I still own that 20 acres of industrial land, now worth substantially more thanks to the improvements and established operations. Every month, when the lease payment from Pinnacle hits my account, I think about my grandfather and how he had the foresight to buy this land 50 years ago. He could never have imagined the saga that would unfold on this property, but I like to think he would have approved of how I handled it. Patient, strategic, and ultimately victorious. The legal system worked exactly as it was supposed to. The criminals were punished, the victim was made whole, and property rights were upheld. It took 5 years, but justice was served. And if there is one lesson to take from this entire experience, it is this. Never underestimate the power of a property deed, the importance of documentation, and the satisfaction of watching people who think they are above the law learn otherwise in front of a judge and jury. I still drive by the factory sometimes, just to see the loading docks busy with trucks, the parking lot full of employee vehicles, and the Pinnacle sign gleaming in the Nevada sun. It is my land, my property, my victory. And that plaque by the entrance with my name on it makes sure everyone knows it. Patricia Hendricks tried to steal my inheritance and turn it into her personal piggy bank. Instead, she gave me the most valuable lesson of my life. Patience and preparation can turn even the most outrageous fraud into the most satisfying victory. The story made national news, was featured in law journals, and became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of proper due diligence in real estate transactions. But for me, it was always personal. It was about my grandfather's legacy, about my property rights, and about refusing to let bullies and criminals win. In the end, the factory that Patricia Hendricks built on my land became the monument to her downfall and my vindication. Every steel beam, every square foot of concrete, every dollar of lease revenue, it all stands as evidence that crime does not pay and that justice, while sometimes slow, is ultimately unstoppable. 5 years of watching, waiting, and documenting. 5 years of letting the criminals dig themselves deeper. 5 years of building an unbeatable case. And then, in one courtroom moment, showing the deed and watching everything crumble. It was worth every second.